On Press Perspective today, we touch upon some sobering trends from workplace disengagement to the business of dying. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome. It's Friday, November 7th here in Seoul, and you're watching Press Perspective. The latest Gallup survey shows global workplace engagement dropped for the first time in 4 years to stand at 21% in 2024. Today we start with this trend among employees here and elsewhere. For this, I have Ruy Valdes with Spanish news agency EFE Spain here in the studio. Ruy, welcome back.
Glad to be here, Sunny.
I also have writer Colin Marshall with the pundit's take on today's topics. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Thanks very much.
Ruy, let's start off then with these findings from the Gallup study, and also what do you suppose are their broader implications?
Right, so the global engagement in the workplace, as you mentioned, has dropped for the first time in 4 years, meaning that the workforce in general, internationally, is less connected, less motivated, and feeling the weight of uncertainty. Just so the audience know the definition of this, when we're talking about engagement, it means the involvement and enthusiasm of employees in their work and workplace. They measure this by evaluating their expectations, recognition, growth opportunities, etc., because they believe that engagement is highly connected to profit as well. So if you don't have an engaged workforce, this could harm your profits, and of course it's also a signal that maybe something is not right in a broader societal level. So just to mention again, the global engagement dropped 23 to 21% last year, and is the second decline since 2009. This fall, according to Gallup's study, translates in an estimated $438 billion in loss of productivity worldwide. They say that managers were hit hardest. Engagement among them slid from 30 to 27%, with sharper drops among younger and female leaders. In general, well-being also fell, and they say that if the workplace would be more engaged, they could actually add like around $9.6 trillion or increase by 9% the global GDP. When they're analyzing why these things, why this effect is happening, they point out that it's because of cost of living pressures and career instability, trap between rising expectation and shrinking rewards. This is a phenomenon, as many of us know, that is happening globally in the sense that people nowadays, or younger people nowadays, they do have access to more services or more technology, but they do not have a financial reward enough to, for example, get a house or get a car or get high value asset that will perdure as compared to their parents or earlier generations. So this could be connected to the results of Gallup, where you have this younger workforce that is thinking, future-orientedly thinking and saying, well, if I stay in this work, maybe, yes, I will get to manager, but even if I get to manager, I would never be able to afford an apartment or a house, so why do I have to make all this sacrifice? And this could create all this anxiety and just, in general, make a less engaged workforce.
Right. Colin, workplace engagement among South Korean employees was found to hover below the global average. Now, Ruy touched upon this as well, but what more can you add to the reasons, perhaps, behind this lack of enthusiasm for work among employees?
Yes. As I recall from seeing the study, the rate of employees here reporting engagement in their work was something like 13%, around that number. It sounds low, but it's actually not the lowest. It's not at the bottom. And when you get to the highest, it's still, you're in the 30-40% territory. The highest, by the way, countries on this ranking were Uzbekistan was number 1. They had the highest proportion of workers feeling engaged. Below them, I forget the order, there was the Philippines, Mongolia, Senegal as well. So these four, so Uzbekistan, Mongolia, the Philippines, and Senegal, tough to draw any parallels between these countries. They're not very similar societies. So what you start wondering is, well, maybe the definition of engagement doesn't track very well between languages and cultures. And this is a theme we come up against on this program quite often, I suspect, is when these global surveys are done, you have one concept and it needs to be applied throughout various societies, through various languages. And what I took note of was seeing the Korean media coverage of this global survey. And of course, those articles are in Korean, and they don't say engagement, they say morip, the Korean term morip. You know, using this word moripada. I seldom use it because it's very strong to describe somebody being in this state, not just engagement. It feels like that to me is more, they're plunged into something. They're so captivated, their attention can't be drawn away by anything else. And I think that's a pretty rare state to be in at work, no matter what society you're a part of, and especially in South Korea when people, let's face it, oftentimes they don't have many kind words to say about their job and what it feels like doing their job. Sometimes because they work for very large corporations, conglomerates, which for many Koreans, not all, is the goal. You want to be employed by one of the big companies that structure this economy. But then when you do, you're such a small cog in such a large machine, it can feel like you're so abstracted from anything happening on the ground, anything happening in society, any cause and effect. You're making PowerPoint shows, maybe, that if you're lucky, that no one ever really sees. So that's a problem. But, you know, nobody would deny the comforts of being in that position either, at least the comforts you get in the life that it affords you. You know, it's better than selling tteokbokki on the street, but the lady selling tteokbokki on the street, she can see the smiles on the faces of the children who come for it after school, and, you know, she can think, I did that. You know, I made something that makes them happy, and I think that's a lot more than many conglomerate employees ever get, unfortunately.
Right, as Ruy was saying, a sense of perhaps reward for the job that's being done. Ruy, you briefly touched upon this earlier. There's a double decline in both workplace engagement and the quality of life. What has been your experience working here in South Korea, and how does that experience perhaps compare to your work elsewhere?
Yes, well, this was a very interesting comparison to make, so I tried to focus on the results for Mexico, the country where I'm from, and Korea, and just also related a little bit with my experience. In general, Korea and Mexico are the OECD, among the OECD countries, the ones that always have the highest number of working hours a day. People tend to overwork a lot. They also have other similarities, but in this ranking, Korea is much below than Mexico. Mexico is actually quite high. It's one of the top countries in Latin America to report a higher engagement in the workplace. So I was giving a little bit of thought of why this could happen. One of the reasons, as Colin pointed out, when you see the evaluation of the results or the countries that were in the first places, it does make you wonder that the difference in culture could affect the conception of what engagement means. Being that said, I do see a striking difference between Korea and Mexico. That is social pressure and expectations. So you have two societies that overwork a lot, but probably, at least in my experience, in Mexico, people tend to be more satisfied when they finish work. When the work is done, it's time to meet their friends, it's time to have some kind of social interactions or activities. You feel like you did your part, and now you can deal with your second life. When I have worked in Korea, I feel that many people do not have that philosophy of working life. They tend to, there's two things. First, they overwork. Many of them either just go to work, maybe have a drink, go home, sleep, and then repeat the same thing over again. Some people just go to work, sleep, go to work, sleep, and then on the weekend maybe they're just sleeping by themselves in their houses. They don't have much social interactions. So probably that's the difference why they have expressed these results of lack of satisfaction or lack of a proper reward as compared to other countries. Still, we need to be a little bit careful when analyzing the data. As Colin was mentioning, in the first places were Uzbekistan, Senegal, and the Philippines, which are very different countries, countries that are far from being developed countries. And also within the developed countries, you see a very large difference. For example, United States and Canada are around the 30%, which is quite high, but France is in 8%, which is one of the lowest of these analyses, which makes you think a little bit that maybe even though French workers express or they have less engagement compared to other countries, maybe also the way they express its results is because their expectations are probably higher than in other, let's say, developing countries. As I just mentioned the example, let's say, of Mexico and South Korea. So probably there's other factors that make them interpret that, as Colin was mentioned, that engagement for them requires a higher level of rewards or a higher quality of life in exchange of their work. So there's very specific factors for every specific culture that I would believe is kind of hard to compare with the index. I'm not saying that the index is useless, because it does give you a perspective of maybe how individually these countries think, but in the moment of comparison, it has to be, at this point or at the point of this conversation, more about, as you just asked me, about my own experience. So my own experience is that Mexico and Korea are similar in the way, in the level that they put on their work, the working hours, but they're different in the sense of their expectations or what they feel, as rewarded for what they do in the workplace.
Right. And Colin, what are some of your takeaways from this study?
I might also draw a parallel, as Ruy did, between my country and the country I came from and this one. I'm from the US, and as he said, the US did pretty well in the rankings in terms of reporting engagement in work. But I've long noticed this contrast in the way people talk about their work and the relationship to the society between the US and Korea. And since I first came here, I would hear Koreans or indeed foreigners complain about Korea. They'd say, oh, I hate Korea, I want to leave Korea. It's not universal, but there are people who say it. You hear it more than you hear it in the US. You don't hear I hate America quite as much. You do hear it, just not as much. And I realized, hearing this over and over again, I'm thinking, what do they hate? What are they complaining about when they say, I hate Korea? And it became clear to me that they hate their jobs. They're always talking about their jobs. You know, it's after some litany of complaints about their boss or their company or whatever, they come around to, I hate Korea, I want to leave Korea. Because they hate their jobs, they declare that they hate Korea. And that's striking when you come from another country. I suspect not just the US, but most other countries, it doesn't quite work that way. Hatred for the job does not translate to hatred for the society itself. And you know, here on this broadcast, we've talked about worabe, work-life balance, the Koreanization of this concept, work-life balance, the idea being you should separate your work from the rest of your life, much as Ruy said in Mexico that happens. Well, I wonder if maybe the work and the society should be a little more separate than they are in Korea. So wosabe, something like that. You know, if the conditions of work and the nature of Korean society weren't so closely tied up or so closely perceived as being tied up, it might be healthier. But as far as takeaways go, I think looking at the conclusions of this survey, it comes down to management, the culture of management being very important and needing to improve management. Maybe that's a problem in Korea. Maybe management is not developed in the right way, or the culture of management doesn't quite work as it needs to. But I think the real winners of this project are going to be the management consultants in whatever country you go to.
Right, something to keep in mind then. Ruy, let's move on to another issue of interest with regard to South Korea in the international media. Agence France-Presse just published an article titled, and I'm quoting, "Death becomes a growing business in aging, lonely South Korea." For the sake of our viewers who may not have read this particular article, could you give us a quick rundown?
Yes, I know this topic might sound a little bit somber because we're going to talk about death, of course, but probably part of what the article addresses is just a part that we need to accept as a society. You know, people will die and there has to be an industry around it. In that sense, the AFP report talk about that because of South Korea is an aging society, many young people are seeing as a potential career path working as what they call trauma scene cleaners, and another type of works related to, for example, when a person passes, clean up their belongings, whatever they left out, and left behind, sorry. And these professions, well, are quite peculiar. The article talks about the people that practice these jobs, and they talk about how when they experience going to the house and seeing the belongings of the person, like bottles of soju that are still not open, or stuff that the person was planning to do or to use, it's quite shocking, but also gives you a very big portrait of a person's life. The focus of the article too is that this industry is growing because there's a lot of lonely deaths. What they call, these are people that live alone, and it's that, let's say, one-person households had been recently increasing a lot in Korea. So there's a lot of people that pass in their houses by themselves. So you have these companies that will take these services. Sometimes they are hired by the relatives of the person that died, so that they could take care of this, what we would think is an uncomfortable part of dealing after death. So there are two parts related to the nature of the job, which is, as I mentioned, the aging society, but there's also the fact that there's many suicide deaths in South Korea. So sometimes it doesn't have to be old people, sometimes it's younger people, and as of course, I don't know, I would love to ask a person who works in this exactly what was the motivation behind it to end up in a work like this, but I feel it's quite a remarkable profession, because at the end it's something that somebody will have to do. And they even talk about that through these jobs, sometimes by avoiding that things get rotten, talking about, let's say, organic things that the person leaves behind, they also help the area not to get polluted. So it's quite a honorable service. But in terms of how it mirrors Korean society, there are parts that should be pointed out in the sense of what Korean society is becoming in terms of aging, and also the big somber issue of suicide, and how all these two phenomena create this new industry.
All right, and staying with that then, Colin, some observers say these chosen career paths, some have preferred to refer to them as bereavement clean-out services, that these career paths among the youth are a reflection of our current reality. What are your thoughts?
Yes, the coverage of this phenomenon in the Korean and foreign media has taken quotes from some of the students studying to become, for example, funeral directors, and as well as these workers doing cleanup as well. They asked them what keeps them going, what got them into this. But with the funeral directors in training, they often responded with either what I would consider a real Korean pragmatism of saying, well, this is a growth industry. You know, there's going to be jobs here, so I'm going to get, even if I'm scared to do it, I'm going to get in on that. Okay, that's one reason. Another they provide is some have had experiences with funeral services here during a difficult time. They've seen these directors or these companies do an unexpectedly good job. They've added, you know, professionalism or even artistry to an event that is undesirable. And so, having experienced that, they feel like they can provide that to their customers as well, if that's something they want to provide. So it's not purely calculating, at least from the students who have provided quotes to newspapers and whatnot. But as well, you know, as I mentioned before, the lady selling tteokbokki on the street, she can feel what service she's providing. And in the same way, somebody cleaning up, as unpleasant as it is, cleaning up a dead person's belongings, you do feel like you're accomplishing, I don't know about accomplish, you feel like you're providing a necessary service. You know exactly what you're doing that needs to be done, and you can sense what would go wrong if you didn't do it. If you weren't there, if you're working in a cubicle at a conglomerate, if you weren't there, the world's probably going to keep turning. But if no one's cleaning up a dead person's belongings, you've got a problem. So it may be not that well paid, and it's certainly unpleasant and arduous, no doubt, but there is a sense that, well, you are contributing to society at the end of it, and that's not available in every job, unfortunately.
And for the sake of comparison, Ruy, what can you tell us about this career path, the bereavement clean-out services among the youth elsewhere, beyond national borders, that is?
Well, I didn't really find that there's a global trend in these services. I found that in some countries, you can draw similarities with the case of Korea. Of course, countries that share similar problems like aging and suicide, like Japan. For example, in Japan, very similar cases or very similar industries is rising, with many young people choosing it as a career path. And they basically do the cleaning, cataloging, mementos, and family support. They also give emotional support to the families, so it's kind of like an integral service. I found in Singapore, there's also similar services. And there is one that has caught the attention internationally because they made a TV adaptation and a book that is called Swedish Death Cleaning. But this is a little bit different. This is, of course, a service created in Sweden. It's when the person is getting close to death because of age or sickness. They hire this service before they die, so this company already organizes how they're gonna, let's say, well, I didn't want to use the word get rid, for lack of a better word, but we'll get rid of their stuff that they're gonna leave behind, either by giving it to the relatives or throwing it away. So when they leave, they don't have to leave behind stuff that honestly, then sometimes it's hard to know what to do with them. Like, depends, every family is different, but if I don't know, if there was not much closeness with the relatives or they're spread it around, it's not that easy also to take care of the things that a person leaves behind after the death. So this is a pre-death service that has become quite a catchy thing internationally.
Over in Sweden, right? It started off there. I believe I read an article on that as well. They talked about decluttering to leave behind a lighter legacy, were the words used by the article I read. All right then, Ruy, I'm afraid that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you.
And Colin, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you. See you next time.
Right, that ends this edition of Press Perspective. As always, thank you for watching. Have a great weekend. See you back on Monday.